Welcome to Module 3, Video 3 from the Safe and Effective Use of AI in Education Online Resources.
This video explores the importance of careful choices and a critical mindset when using generative AI. A critical mindset is a kind of thinking in which you question, analyse, interpret, evaluate, and make a judgment about something that you read, hear, see, or write. We know this is particularly important when using generative AI. Many chatbots may have persuasive or overly agreeable tones, and this can sometimes make it difficult to be objective.
And I think those types of considerations are going to be incredibly important as the tools in AI allow for them to create more rapidly, to share more widely, and in many cases sometimes make it indistinguishable from something that they might have created over an expanded length of time or that they can create now in 5 to 10 seconds.
Teachers can critically evaluate the output from generative AI by really being mindful about, well, first of all, what is it you want the tool to do? So is it in terms of summarising information? Is it in terms of ensuring that resources are presented in an engaging way? So having the framework in mind about what you wanted to do and then checking, has it met that particular criteria? But also more essentially ensuring that the information it provides is accurate as well and it's appropriate to suit the learning needs of the students that they teach.
I think one of the things that we don't talk about enough is AI literacy. So there is AI in teaching and learning and keeping our children safe and extending their understanding and use of it. But then there's this whole other area of AI literacy. And so we've actually developed curriculum plans in terms of bringing in AI lessons into teaching and learning from a more pedantic technical point of view. And whereas our teachers know things about being safe, they know about cybersecurity, they know about innovation and multimedia within our computing-like curriculum, they don't know enough about AI literacy. And those components of understanding the history of AI, understanding what it means to work with narrow AI or wide AI, and what is composed of, what are the implications of using AI in all sorts of scenarios, we're not honing enough on that. And I think that conversation has to come as emerging in this market space.
We must recognise that AI-generated materials can reflect biases present in the data on which they have been trained. Many open-source LLMs reproduce societal biases that have been documented over time. As with any source material, it is essential that we explicitly acknowledge this and take active steps to mitigate such biases through careful prompting and rigorous critical evaluation of the outputs produced. Bias often appears in AI-generated materials in the form of cultural assumptions and gender stereotypes. For example, in a text response, consistently associating nurse with female pronouns or manager with male. Image generation tools can also present biased assumptions. It's therefore important that we prompt in such a way that addresses this. For example, if we are asking for an image to be generated of a group of academic lecturers, some tools will present images of a group of older white men. We can therefore prompt for biases in this case by specifically asking for a group of diverse lecturers that represent academic leadership today. We should also be prepared to not accept the first output we receive and balance any biases that may have appeared with further iteration or a revised prompt.
When Gen AI first came out a few years ago, we had something which is quite obvious, and it's called third-party fairness bias. And this is where you may say, for example, I have a girl and I have a boy. One of them's come top in the class in this test, one of them's come in the bottom. Can you tell me which one came to the first and which one came at the bottom? And it would, without fail, always say the boy came to the top and the girl came to the bottom. But this has been worked on over the past few years, and so that kind of obvious bias is not really completely eradicated, but it's not really there anymore, and we don't have to worry about it as much. The thing that we do have to worry about is something that is called first-person fairness bias, and this is where we bring into play anything to do with names or a context. So, for example, if you were to say, create a story on electrons for Sarah or for Trudy or for Mark or Jamal. So here you're introducing a name And this has not been tested as much, and there is a lot of work that needs to happen in this space. But also, this is something that educators are looking to do. We're looking to personalise, and if we're going to personalise, we're looking at the context of a learner. So we might say, for instance, adapt this lesson plan for an EHCP child, or we might say, adapt this lesson plan for John, who identifies as autistic. And so what you've done there is you've given a little bit of contextual information, the identification and the name, but you haven't given enough contextual information to get an accurate result. So what it will do is it will pull information from the statistical norms and you will get a biased result. So anywhere where we've got a name involved or any kind of label, which we have a lot of in education, is susceptible to this first person bias. And we're finding, and there's mounting research now that's starting to talk about how this manifests in terms of narrative metaphor, which is, for instance, stories or examples, careers advice, anything like that. So, for example, in a lesson plan, you might say, create a lesson on forces with the objective of differentiating between push and pull as a force, for example. That will give you a fairly neutral result. If you were to then say and adapt it for learners who identify as autistic, ADHD or dyslexic, it will then start to show biased outcomes because it is deciding normally from a deficit perspective what an autistic learner needs, what their identity is. And so the bias that we get then comes out in terms of the activities that might be chosen. In terms of the assumptions, I found that if you give it an EHCP, it will pick social stories for girls and Lego therapy for boys. So there's all these little bits that are kind of distributed throughout educator use that we won't necessarily, especially if we're time poor, see straight away like we would do, like the initial biases that were initially in the system.
It is important to be asking questions about the diversity and representation of perspectives in the AI's content, as you would with any other content, and ensuring that any AI use supports rather than restricts equity in learning outcomes for all students. It is also important to be sharing this process with pupils and students and provide this learning opportunity.
Bias can be introduced or reduced through prompt design that steers the AI tool towards fair and culturally relevant outputs. You could include explicit instructions for the material to include fairness. So, for example, you could prompt, produce examples that reflect the regional and demographic diversity of the UK student population, ensuring parity across socio-economic backgrounds and avoid reliance on narrow school contexts. The OECD published a paper in September 2025 called Leveraging Artificial Intelligence to Support Students with Special Education Needs. In this it says, AI algorithms can reinforce biases, thereby perpetuating inequalities and discriminatory practices against specific groups. Individuals with special education needs are thus at a higher risk of being negatively impacted by compounded biases in algorithms, such as in automatic diagnostic systems. This bias means that models may produce outputs such as diagnoses, predictions, or tailored resources that are inaccurate or discriminatory against students whose characteristics deviate from the training data. Any adoption of AI tools should prioritise human-centred and ethical design, actively mitigating these biases by seeking input from individuals with special educational needs, accessibility experts, and diverse school and college staff.
Yeah, so if we're looking at specific neurodiversity needs, AI struggles sometimes. You've got to think a lot of that content that's out there for AI is generated by neurotypical mindsets. It's generated with neurotypical data. It's generated with neurotypical examples. So I think if you are looking at a quick resource, I can see its benefit, but if you're really looking to fine tune that with like that SEN expertise, that's where the human comes in. You know, that's where AI has given us that starting point and then we're developing that resource. I haven't found a resource yet that really meets that need when you really drill down into it.
AI can be a useful tool for saving time, streamlining tasks and improving efficiency in areas such as policy writing, lesson planning, and letter writing. It can quickly generate drafts, summarise key points from lengthy documents, and compare existing policies against new legislation. This can free up valuable time for school and college staff, allowing them to focus on other priorities. However, while AI can take on much of the heavy lifting, there are moments when outsourcing too much of the thinking process can be risky. Some tasks require deep engagement, critical analysis, and professional judgment, things that AI cannot replicate. If we allow AI to do all of the work, we risk losing out on valuable learning, understanding and scrutiny that comes from thinking through a problem ourselves. A clear example of this is when drafting or updating school or college policy. AI can certainly help by structuring a document, suggesting wording, or even identifying potential gaps based on new legislation. However, it remains the responsibility of school or college leaders to fully understand the legal requirements and ensure that policy is fit for purpose. Relying solely on AI could mean missing crucial nuances in the law, misinterpreting regulatory updates, or failing to tailor a policy to the specific needs of the organisation. A related challenge is the tendency to anthropomorphise AI, treating it as if it has intentions, reasoning, or understanding akin to human intelligence. AI does not think or know in the way people do. It processes patterns and probabilities based on its training data. When AI is framed as a sentient-like entity, users may overtrust its responses or expect it to behave ethically on its own, rather than recognising the need for human oversight. This misplaced perception can lead to complacency in evaluating AI-generated content, and risks attributing authority to a system that ultimately lacks true comprehension. Recognising AI as a tool, and one that requires scrutiny and contextual understanding, helps to mitigate these risks. As we've explored in this video, careful choices and a critical mindset are paramount when interacting with generative AI. It's also important in evaluating whether or not we should choose to use AI for particular tasks. The way many AI systems have been designed to sound persuasive can easily sway our objectivity. By taking a considered approach ourselves, we make it more likely that any output we use from generative AI tools is appropriate for its intended use.